Over the past few years, F1's evolved into a global phenomenon thanks to Drive to Survive, and of course, some great racing. However, this also had some less desirable side effects on the sport, and F1 legend Martin Brundle bore the brunt of that in Miami over the weekend. So what exactly went down, and how does he feel about it? Well, keep watching to find out. First up, Brundle's iconic grid walk turns into a complete disaster. Formula One's always been a sport that's about traditions and rituals. There's a certain order to how things are supposed to go over a racing weekend, with some tracks having their own twist on top of it. For instance, Monaco's got all its millionaires lining up in their yachts next to the track thing. One thing that's been consistent for many years, though, is Martin Brundle's grid walk before each race. In fact, it's kind of become synonymous with the sport at this point, even if it's a Sky Sports thing these days. And honestly, you don't get the same buzz before a race if Brundle isn't there to walk us through the grid and sneak in some cheeky interviews with the drivers and team bosses. The weekend in Miami, however, was a whole different story, as the former Benetton driver was caught way out of his element. Usually, he's pretty decent at doing these things, as people on the grid know and respect him not only for his F1 chops, but also for his legendary career as a commentator. So, getting exclusive interviews and joking around with the drivers is a piece of cake for him. The grid at the Miami Grand Prix, though, was jam-packed full of celebrities doing photo ops and getting up close and personal with the cars. In fact, it was so crowded that there was barely any room to walk around at all. And as a result, Brundle couldn't get a hold of what was really going down and found himself awkwardly interviewing celebrities instead. Now, if you don't know, Martin Brundle's an old-school guy and probably doesn't care about pop culture anymore, especially at his age. So even though some of the big names he was talking to were actual Hollywood superstars, he had literally no idea who they were. The end result? Complete disaster. For realsies, what transpired over the next 10 minutes was not only super painful to watch, but also some of the most entertaining F1 TV stuff we've seen in a long time. Next, Martin Brundle's cringe fest goes viral on social media. The poor 62-year-old stumbled through interviews, talking to stars like Pharrell Williams and DJ Khaled with massive awkward silences in between. Plus, he also had his yearly run-in with the Venus sisters. Not only did he confuse Venus Williams with her sister, but his question didn't really get through to her either, so she just kinda responded with some generic stuff about how she loved having Lewis Hamilton and the other drivers in Miami. However, Brundle, being the clueless little angel that he is, kept standing there rather than moving on, which made things even more awkward. With that said, as cringe as this moment was, it was still less agonizing than his incident with Megan Thee Stallion and Serena Williams in October, both of whom completely snubbed him. Now, when things aren't going your way, maybe you should put the brakes on and call it a day. But Martin Brundle, being the soldier that he is, continued to make us all wince. One of the people he interviewed later during his walk was none other than American college basketballer Paolo Banchero. However, he thought that the guy was Kansas City Chiefs quarterback Patrick Mahomes. So, for the entirety of the interview, he kept calling him Patrick and only realized what he'd done later. Of course, social media was loving every single bit of this as well. In fact, for a brief period before the race, Martin Brundle was actually trending on Twitter. Obviously, it was for all the wrong reasons, but the funny thing is that he already knew this before heading in. Next, Brundle doesn't even like doing grid walks. Now, if someone's been doing something for 25 years, you'd think that they'd love doing that thing, right? Well, in the case of Martin Brundle, the answer is a big no. The 62-year-old opened up about his Miami disaster class after the race and said that he's always hated doing the grid walk. According to him, he's never watched any of his walks back either, yet somehow they've defined his career. Of course, if you were a decent F1 driver and a really good commentator, you'd be pretty annoyed about being defined by brief moments of cringe too. However, that's just the way these things go sometimes, and Brundle has accepted that as well. Besides, there's the other side to it as well. You see, as bad as it can be at times, the grid walk continues to outshine most other Formula One coverage, as we don't really get to be this close to the drivers and the teams during a race weekend. Plus, even when things go wrong, it's still entertaining content. Luckily, Luckily for us, he's not thinking of quitting anytime soon. We're thankful for that. Does F1 need to change its celebrity culture? While the Miami grid walk was definitely one of the low points of Martin Brundle's career, it wasn't an isolated incident. Formula One, being the glamorous sport that it is, has the tendency to go too far with this stuff at times, which kinda takes the focus away from the racing. Plus, we've seen similar things happen time and time again, where celebrities who are given special access to the grid end up ruining things. For instance, when Max Verstappen won at Monaco last year, his post-race interview had Serena Williams just standing there awkwardly for no reason. And even though the interviewer tried to include her in the conversation, it was just super awkward. Like, of course it was. Max had just won one of the biggest races of his career, and Serena was there just for the vibes. Honestly, sometimes F1 can be kinda baffling, so there's definitely a conversation to be had about the sport trying to shoehorn in celebrities for social credit. With that said, having people who actually love Formula One isn't a bad thing. Take Rowan Atkinson, for example. The man absolutely loves cars, and whenever he's sitting in the McLaren garage during a race, you know he's there because of his passion. Stars who are merely there for the spectacle are important too, but perhaps having them so involved in the action isn't a great idea, as they can kinda ruin the whole viewing experience. But obviously, these celebrities do promote F1 and are super useful in that regard, so there's that angle too. Now, in other related news, Haas looking at options to replace Mick Schumacher. When Michael Schumacher's son Mick made the jump to F1, many people had high hopes for him. After all, he was the son of perhaps the greatest driver of all time, and while he did outperform his teammate Nikita Mazepin in his first season, that wasn't a really good barometer, as the Russian was pretty terrible. So, when a veteran like Kevin Magnussen stepped in to partner Mick at Haas for this season, it was obvious that the German would have his work cut out. Sadly for him though, things haven't gone great, as he's failed to score a single point so far this season. Oh, and let's not even go into detail about the massive crashes he's had so far this season. The bottom line is that things aren't working out for the 23-year-old, and now it seems like Haas is looking elsewhere for solutions. Of course, there are plenty of drivers around who could easily replace him, like Giovinazzi and even Oscar Piastri. However, it seems like the German might just power through this wave of misfortune thanks to his Ferrari connection and influence. But if he continues to perform like this, his time in F1 might come to an end sooner rather than later. Next, F1 executive director exits the sport. Speaking of time in F1 coming to an end, the FIA has just announced that its Secretary General for Sport and Executive Director, Peter Bayer, has left the group. Bayer's been a part of the sport for almost 5 years, but the new regime under President Mohammed Ben Sulayem switched things around. So, as a result, we're getting a new interim replacement in the form of Shaila Ann Rao, who's been a legal director for the sport before. Also, former DAM's managing director Francois Sicard is also coming in as the new sporting director, so a big reshuffle is currently happening at the FIA. Lastly, Sergio Perez renews Red Bull contract. Ever since he signed for Red Bull, Sergio Perez has been doing great as a wingman to Verstappen. This season, however, the Mexicans discovered the form of his life, as he's hot on the heels of Max and Leclerc in the title race. Plus, his Monaco win confirmed that he's the man for that second Red Bull seat. So, the team has decided to reward him for his efforts by offering him a new contract until 2025. Obviously, Checo has fully embraced that opportunity as well. In fact, the Mexican has vowed that he's gonna give it his all to go for the championship this season. And while this may make things a bit complicated for Red Bull in terms of strategy, it's what every F1 fan wants. Do you think that the Mexican can win the championship this season though? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.